Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a company built a huge illegal warehouse on my private farm without my permission and destroyed my property while I was in the hospital. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. So I own and manage a farm in Mongolia that has been in my family for more generations than I can count. The entire area is just large rural farms without much modern life really coming in. I grow crops, raise animals, and just in general live a natural life with my family. I have a wife, 3 sons and 2 daughters, all of them went to school in the city and a few wanted life outside of the farm, while 2 sons and 1 daughter stayed. One thing people don't always know is that a farm can be a dangerous place even if you know what you are doing. There is large equipment and animals that at the end of the day are unpredictable. I think there is a saying similar to that even the best trained and nicest horse can still knock you to the ground and kick you. I was standing in front of my tractor because it had just stopped working, and well, once I was standing there, it decided to come back to life and move right towards me. To make things worse, my shirt got caught and I ended up being run over and then dragged by the tractor until my son was able to run over and turn it off. I don't want to talk too much about my injuries because I want this to be a story everybody can enjoy. Well, I will say that I was lucky to be alive and almost unrecognizable due to the damage that this caused. A tractor is not like a car, it's heavier. There was nothing that could be done in my area, so I had to be transported into the city for treatment. I was in the hospital for months and underwent a ton of surgeries to both keep me alive and tried to make me look like myself again. Or at least as close to what I looked like as they could. My family did not want to abandon me there because the doctors at first could not even tell them if I was gonna survive. Plus, I needed their support for my long and hard recovery. So they all found a place in the city to stay with relatives, and my son contacted the farmers next to us and asked if they would take in our livestock until we returned. They agreed, and the crops were being handled mainly by the irrigation and watering systems, with people agreeing to check on them once in a while. I did not realize how much he had grown and become responsible until I got hurt. He really turned into another man of the family. So while I was busy recovering from my accident, a development company was moving in on my land. They had contacted the local government claiming that they needed some land, also claiming that there's been no activity or proof that anybody was living on or running the land. They of course tried and failed to contact me as the listed owner. I could not disagree, so they were given permission and started cutting up my farm. I did not know any of this until weeks later when my brother went and checked on my farm. He had moved out of the country years prior but still came to visit family and wanted to see me after he heard about the accident. He told me that he called the company after he saw my land was being destroyed and tried to talk to somebody in charge. But they just laughed at him and told him that they had legal paperwork and he could just go away. I could not do a single thing in the state I was in, and what my brother was able to do could only go so far. Trying to call and get them to stop their construction of my property. I was not able to see the total of what they had done until I was released from the hospital and able to go back home. Except that it wasn't home anymore because they had transformed most of my property. Digging up all the crops, destroying barns, etc., they built an entire shell of a large warehouse. The only positive thing was my house was still standing, and I worked fast to get a lawyer who could send a letter to stop the construction as a lawsuit was being filed. I spoke to my neighbors who told me about the speed the construction was undergoing and that they tried telling people that I lived there. They just did not care to listen to anybody, so I was suing them for destruction of property, illegal seizure of property, and trespassing. They did not seem to care, thinking they were in the right, stating that they got the paperwork from the government and that saved them from any actual lawsuits. They were not gonna budge, and I had to take them to court in order to try and get my land handed back over to me. At the trial, I showed evidence that I was in the hospital during the entire time and had no ability to appear during the other process that gave them my land. It turns out that I was being sent letters, and while we couldn't prove it, it seemed pretty obvious that company took them and threw them out. It didn't matter that much because it turned out that the process they had to go through was something they cut corners with. Something that ended up really hurting them in the long run. They needed some kind of proof that nobody was living on the land aside from not getting a letter response. One of the listed things that they can do is get sworn statements from neighbors saying that my family had left and nobody had been on the land for X amount of time. He had statements from my neighbors, only the problem was that they were all fake. Letters saying that I moved out of the country and the land had been empty for months. When my neighbors were actually more than happy to give real statements that they never wrote those letters and the company just made them up. The court saw that they had taken advantage of the fact that I was injured and my entire family was off of the property, to abuse a system in place for actual good just to get free land and claim that it was needed for important storage. They were found fully liable and had to compensate me for everything. For the land they destroyed, the structures destroyed, the crops they dug up, just everything. The court even forced them to give me money that would have been my projected earnings for the time that they held up my land and did not allow me to make any profit. They got destroyed and heavily embarrassed in court that day, probably thinking they would not have any issues winning a case against a rural farmer. Update to the story: there were some things in my original story that people seem to really want to know about, and while I cannot answer every single person, I'll do my best to cover the big things. Somebody asked me if the development company got in any other legal trouble for having the fake documents, and the answer to that one is yes. The government did an investigation on them to see if anything else they did was fishy, and I believe somebody in the company even went to jail for it. I don't have a ton of details, unfortunately. I also have people asking for the name of the company, but I don't feel comfortable giving something like that out. What I can tell you is that nobody needs to worry, because after the major lawsuit loss, they went bankrupt and out of business. And finally, I had a lot of people asking me details about my accident and hospital stay. I know that I only glossed over some of that, but in reality, I don't remember all of it. I spent a lot of time in the beginning of my stay under serious pain medication that knocked me out. Otherwise, I would have known of the issues and maybe been a little more aggressive about it. And yeah, ripe stars, by the way, if you're wondering, as mentioned in the beginning, this story took place in Mongolia, and the story was originally written in Russian, so I had to translate it with Google. So please accept my apologies if some of it has not been perfect grammatically. Anyway, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe post some star emojis in the comments to support me. Thank you so much, and the next one is an XXL Am I the A-hole story. So for context, I've been married to my wife for 10 years and we are a mixed race couple. I am Asian and she is Caucasian. So I've gotten along with her family, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, but I always felt like her father-in-law and other sister-in-law, Sarah, never liked me. For context, I'm a professionally trained chef with 15+ years of experience and I work at a high-end Chinese restaurant. A spin-off of a popular one in Beijing in a large US city. My crew and I have won several awards and I've been explicitly told that I'll be the next executive chef. Sarah is also a professionally trained chef and works at a popular upscale French restaurant in the city. She constantly brags about it and, no joke, compares herself out loud to Ramsay and Bourdain. And by the way, if there are any Anthony Bourdain fans in the comments, please let me know, because to be honest guys, Anthony Bourdain was and still is one of my role models. Rest in peace. Anyway, whenever I'm at my mother-in-law's and father-in-law's house and helping out in the kitchen, Sarah is always criticizing everything I do. Whether it is chopping, braising, marinating, etc., she always butts in with comments like, I think you should actually do X like this. I've been patient for my wife and sidestepping those comments, saying things like, thanks, but I think I will stick to the way I do it. Things came to a head 2 weeks ago when my wife, father-in-law, mother-in-law, and I were in her parents' kitchen prepping dinner for my mother-in-law's birthday. We were running a bit behind, so things were heated, which I kind of liked because it reminded me of work, and that is when Sarah walked in. She took one look at what I was doing, scoffed and said something like, "Oh wow, okay, so that's not the right way of doing things." It hit a nerve with me and I pretty sternly told her to stop criticizing my cooking and that I am also a chef like her. She laughed and said, "Making Kung Pao chicken at some Chinese restaurant does not count." The kitchen went silent, father-in-law snorted and chuckled and my mother-in-law yelled, "Sarah, what's wrong with you?" I stopped what I was doing and swore at her and called her a racist piece of crap, apologized to my mother-in-law for not being able to stay, and left for home with my wife. Apparently, this caused a massive fight after we left, with my mother-in-law, brother-in-law and other sister-in-law taking my side and my father-in-law and Sarah saying it was a joke but kind of true and that I was being too sensitive. The extended family somehow got wind of this and now everyone is arguing and taking sides, with my wife even getting texts from some of her cousins apologizing for Sarah's behavior. Despite being on my side, my wife is begging me to apologize so that the fighting will stop, but I refuse to because F Sarah and her blatant racism. So Reddit, am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know what you think about this one in the comments. Is OP the a-hole here or not? And personally, I would say that OP's wife needs to grow a spine and defend her husband in this situation, because Sarah is clearly being racist towards OP, and that was an absolutely unnecessary statement. Then again though, props to some parts of the family that even apologized for Sarah's stupid behavior. Either way, the first comment said, not the a-hole, that is some racist BS, and if your sister-in-law is bringing it out at work, she should get in trouble. I am Asian and white, and that means I get to pass sometimes, which has led to me receiving all sorts of educational in-group experiences with white people. Someone who talks like this to your face is a lot worse behind your back. And then there's the generalized racism of the entire notion that Asian food is crap and French is somehow elevated. Chinese cooking can require incredible skill and timing. There is literally nothing that French cuisine has that Asian cuisine doesn't, and in terms of delicacy of the art, care taken with flavor and technique, or impressiveness of final product. Asian food is frequently inexpensive in the States because that's how our immigrating families survived. Taking their recipes and making them sweeter and saltier because that's what white people wanted. But American Chinese food and traditional Chinese food are not the same thing. And it is just filthily racist to insist that there's no such thing as good Chinese. By the way, for non-Asian readers in the crowd, the documentary Searching for General Tso was pretty good. Your wife is also the a-hole for telling you to apologize. She needs to grow a spine. What happens when the fighting stops if it means you've had to compromise yourself? Does she realize what she's asking of you? And by the way, Ripe Stars, I'm kind of curious if that's really true that Asian food is inexpensive in the States, because I recently visited Canada and it was really shocking how expensive every food is. No matter if it is white people food in quotation marks or Asian food in quotation marks, just everything was expensive. For example, we went to a Japanese ramen restaurant and the ramen cost like 17 Canadian dollars, which is like 12 to 13 US dollars. And the same type of ramen, and even better here in the north of Thailand, would cost around $4 to $5. So the price difference was just crazy for me. Anyway, another comment said, not the a-hole, if she gets in trouble at work, that's on her. They don't fire good chefs for a simple remark at home. They might, however, fire a bad person or chef over something like that. She was attacking your career, which was not cool. What was the father-in-law's career? Where did he work? And now we got an update to the story, and it reads like this. My wife has informed me that now Sarah may be in trouble at work and she is blaming me for it. Apparently one of her co-workers heard her rant about what happened and reported it to management. To clarify, Sarah is blaming me, though my wife is partly blaming me too. Another update, so it looks like one of my wife's cousins found this post and put it on Sarah's Facebook wall, going, "This is you, right?" Her Facebook friends are starting to comment with things like, "If this is you, Sarah, then I'm disappointed. I think Sarah is still at work, crap might be hitting the fan soon, and now my wife is pissed too. We'll try to update, but might have to delete this if things go nuclear." Update number 3 was considering removing, but I just got a voicemail from my father-in-law that says, "Your presence was only being tolerated up until this point," and threatened a world of hurt if I didn't delete this post. Officially gonna keep this post up, and if you're still reading this, Duck, I'm very disappointed in you. You are better than this. We'll also continue to update, and thanks again for all your support. And now the next update. A lot of stuff just went down. My wife got a call from sister-in-law. From my wife's paraphrasing, Sarah started screaming and crying at her the moment my wife picked up and said that she just got demoted because of her Asian slur husband. Apparently some of her co-workers have her on Facebook and showed the post to management. which combined with her earlier rant double whammied her back to being a line cook, and now she might get fired. My wife told her to go F herself and is now solidly on my side after taking the verbal abuse from Sarah and reading some of the comments here. My wife is still the opposite of happy though. Wife called mother-in-law and asked her what the hell was going on with father-in-law. Mother-in-law was confused, so my wife played back the voicemail I had on my phone, and apparently my mother-in-law literally just walked away from the phone without hanging up and started screaming at father-in-law. Facebook post has now devolved into a cluster F flame war with family and friends jumping in. Suffice to say, it has officially gone nuclear. Next update, I think I'm going to have to call this a day. We'll make an update post when the dust settles. So now another update. Suffice to say, it's been kind of nuts this past week. My wife and I had to turn off social media for a bit because of the crap storm caused by her cousin putting my last post on Sarah's Facebook page. Some people even tried to call the restaurant I work at to get me fired as retribution, but luckily everyone there is 100% on my side, or as my boss put it, F Sarah, F those racists, F them so much. I guess it didn't help them that half the calls involved threats, screaming, and more racial slurs. We did not hear any updates from her family, even though we assumed the crap met fan after mother-in-law found out about father-in-law's threatening voicemail. Still disappointed in you, Doug. But that changed on Sunday night when mother-in-law suddenly showed up at our door with overnight bags. After we took a moment to help unpack and calm down, she spilled the beans on everything. Apparently, my mother-in-law and father-in-law were already having trouble in their marriage, and it was only made worse with a certain 2016 presidential election. She is a Democrat and he had apparently gone more far-right since then. Seems that a line was crossed with the Gung Pao incident and his voicemail. When he refused to apologize for anything, typical Doug, she asked for a divorce and he went berserk. She didn't feel safe there, so that is when she came over. Other brother-in-law and sister-in-law live out of town. Extended family, aka the Great FB War of 2021. You may have been able to tell already, but the extended family was largely arguing, fighting, divided along political lines for a few years now, and my cousin's Facebook post was likely just a light to set off the powder keg. According to my mother-in-law, the fallout has allegedly already led to some breakups, excommunication of some family members, and even an argument that ended with police involvement. Have not verified this myself though. As for Sarah and sister-in-law, according to my mother-in-law, Sarah came over to her place on Friday. The writing was on the wall and she was basically forced to quit. Despite her trying to start from scratch as a line cook, the entire staff turned against her. Nothing was coming back from the dish pit for her and she was getting the cold shoulder. She is a great chef, I'll admit this is true, but they took no chances since it turns out, crap you not, they are partly owned by a Chinese investment company. I found this hard to believe and didn't want to add this detail, but it turned out to be true after some research, won't say any further for privacy. Word also got around in the local industry and Sarah is essentially blacklisted from high-end establishments. She is now considering selling her home and moving to find work. As much as I don't like her and found her behavior horrifying, I didn't intend for this to happen, so I've reached out to some buds in other states to see if they had any openings. Whether or not she wants to take it up is up to her, and no, she hasn't apologized for anything either yet, but I still want to be a decent person to her. It sure as hell doesn't feel like a happy ending, perhaps bittersweet justice, but that's all I can give you. Thank you all for your support and for reading. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I am an Indian woman and a new mother to my little half-Indian, half-American baby girl. She is 6 months old. The day I went into labor, I learned that my husband was having an affair with our neighbor. She is only 22 and has a myriad of mental health issues. She and my husband started an affair after she got out of rehab, but I had no idea that him trying to help her would involve his cucumber. It was a traumatic day. I cannot mention much here, but to put it shortly, she declared that she was 3 months pregnant with my husband's kid and had an emotional breakdown. She fainted and my husband left me alone in the hospital to take her to another ward. He carried her in his arms in front of my own eyes. He returned after a few hours and I had just given birth to our daughter. He took her in his arms, kissed her and left the room. So 2 days go by, my husband returns finally telling me that he will have to move out because his mistress is emotionally fragile and he was the only person in the world who could support her. He supported us financially but rarely visited. His girlfriend spent a few days in and out of the hospital. It was a continuous back and forth of her hospital visits. She gave birth prematurely and the baby spent a lot of time in the NICU struggling between life and death. The baby was also born with a host of disabilities and conditions which would cost them thousands of dollars in medical bills. The last time he came to visit our daughter, he looked really distressed and emotional. That day, I also overheard him talking to her on the phone. He was promising her that he would always prioritize their baby over our baby. He also promised her that he would always love their baby over our baby because their baby was a product of love and our baby was a product of duty sex. That day, I called my parents back in India and told them everything. They told me to come back home. I don't have family in the US. His family was not close to me either, so I am all alone. I came to the US on the fiancé visa to marry him. My former boss back in India got to know what happened to me and offered me a new position, telling me that she would love to have me back. Knowing that my baby would suffer in her father's house, I planned my escape and left the United States. I am never going back. My divorce will be official in some time. India is not a signatory to the Hague Child Abduction Convention, so technically I have not abducted my child. US laws don't apply in India and we didn't have a custody order or arrangement. My husband is now blowing up on my phone. My parents have blocked him everywhere. Some of my friends are telling me that I ripped my baby's father out of her life and that I'm a horrible mother. Am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Is OP the a-hole for saving her child from this awful cheating father? Let me know in the comments. A user in the comments said, not the a-hole, he lied to you, knocked someone else up, prioritized their pregnancy over your baby's birth, and even admitted to not caring or loving your baby as much as the other. You did the right thing. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. Hell no, prioritize your child. It would be worse for her to grow up with a father that prioritizes another child that is basically the same age. I cannot imagine that sibling rivalry or how awful the 22-year-old may be to them. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would definitely agree here. OP absolutely did the right thing and that kid should not grow up with such an awful father. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I always heard about the stereotype of the neighbor from hell, but I never thought I would actually have to deal with one. That is until Karen moved into the house next door. For context, Karen is a middle-aged woman with a short temper and egoistic personality, and she uses every opportunity to make my life miserable. She is part of my local HOA and had been a thorn in my side since the day she moved in. She seemed to take pleasure in causing problems for others using her position in the HOA, particularly those she deemed different or inferior. As an Asian American, I quickly became a target for her hate and bigotry. It seems like every day there is something new that Karen is complaining about. At first, it was small things like complaining about the color of my house or the type of my plants I had in my front yard. I would be mowing my lawn and she would come over to complain about the noise. She would call the HOA to complain about the smallest violations. Stuff like my bin being left out for too long or my car being parked in front of my own house. It was clear that she just wanted to make my life miserable. But one time I was walking my dog around the neighborhood when Karen came out of her house and started screaming at me. "Keep your damn dog off my lawn," she yelled, even though my dog was on a leash and had not even gone near her property. I tried to reason with her, but she just kept yelling and making a scene. It was humiliating and I felt like I could not even walk in my own neighborhood anymore without being harassed. But then things started to escalate. Karen would steal packages off of my porch and leave nasty notes in my mailbox accusing me of being a terrible neighbor and a bad influence on the community. She even went as far as to make up violations and lies about me to the HOA board. And when I rebuked those rumors and demanded justice, I was ignored. It seems like these HOA jerks are a toxic, tight-knit family. One day, I came home to find that Karen had stolen my garden tools from my garage. I was shocked that someone would do something like that, but I knew it was her because I had seen her snooping around my property before. When I confronted her about it, she denied it and said that I must have misplaced them. I knew better, but without any proof, there was nothing I could do. So I decided to get CCTV cameras, but of course, even as the cameras were being installed, Karen kept throwing insults saying how much of a coward I am. Few days later, I came home to find Karen in my backyard trying to steal some of my prized tomatoes. When I confronted her yet again, because this time I had caught her in the act, she became defensive and accused me of stealing from her garden. It was absurd and infuriating, but unfortunately not surprising given her track record. But the worst part of it all was Karen's racism towards me. She would make snide comments about my race and culture and would try to exclude me from community events and gatherings. She would publicly mock my accent and would not even stop when someone interferes, and even tried to get the HOA to force me to remove my cultural decorations from my front yard. It was hurtful and exhausting to deal with on a daily basis. Another incident happened at a community event hosted by the HOA. I was volunteering to help set up tables and chairs when Karen walked up to me and said, "Why don't you go back to your own country where you belong?" I was shocked and hurt by her racist comment. I could not believe someone could be so blatantly prejudiced in this day and age. I reported her to the HOA, but they did not take any action, saying it was just her opinion. It all came to a head when Karen went so far as to spray paint a racial slur on my garage door. I was shocked and infuriated by her hateful act. I tried to confront her and reason with her, but Karen was unresponsive and unapologetic. She seemed to revel in the power she had over me like a bully on the playground. When she found out that I was considering legal action against her, she doubled down on her efforts to intimidate and harass me. I still called the police and reported her for the hate crimes, and thankfully she was arrested and charged with vandalism and a hate crime. However, she was released soon after and continued to make my life a living hell, this time with renewed enthusiasm, as if going to jail has given her some kind of encouragement. It was during all of this when my mother's medical emergency happened. She suddenly collapsed in our house and I had to call an ambulance. I remember feeling panicked and scared as I watched the paramedics wheel her out on a stretcher and load her in through the ambulance. It was a moment of crisis, a time when any normal person would put aside their petty grievances and help in any way they could. But Karen was not a normal person. "What's going on here? Why is that ambulance parked in front of my house?" Karen yelled, pointing her finger at the paramedics. The paramedics calmly explained the situation to Karen, telling her that it was an emergency and they needed to park the ambulance as close as possible to our house. But Karen was not having any of it. She started ranting about how she does not allow anyone to park in front of her house and how this was disrupting her peace. "This is unacceptable. Move that ambulance now. This is my property and you have no right to be here." Karen continued to scream, her face turning red with rage. I tried to interfere at that moment. My mother is having a medical emergency and the paramedics need to park the ambulance here. Please understand. But of course, how could a Karen ever be understanding for others, especially those that she loves to bully? "Karen, I don't care. You cannot just park an ambulance here. It's against the law." I tried to keep calm because getting violent would not be solving any problems. By the way, I'm not sure if I agree here. Anyway, actually, it's not against the law to park an ambulance in front of your house if it's for an emergency. But yet again, how could a Karen ever understand the law that is not in her favor? "Karen, I don't give a damn. Move this ambulance right now or you will see what I do." But the paramedics couldn't move the ambulance, they had to keep it parked where it was to ensure my mom got the necessary care as quickly as possible. Karen was not having any of it though. She went inside only to come back out with a baseball bat and started swinging it at the ambulance, smashing the windows and causing a scene that attracted the attention of the entire neighborhood. The paramedics quickly retreated back into my house to avoid getting hit by Karen's wild swings. However, she wasn't done yet. She kept smashing the windows and yelling insults at the paramedics even as they called the police. It was a terrifying scene and I could see that my mother was in distress. Her pain was clearly visible on her face and it broke my heart to see her suffering like that. Karen was so caught up in her own rage that she didn't even notice my mother's condition or how she could seriously harm the paramedics. It was clear that Karen's behavior was not only selfish and inconsiderate, but also dangerous. When the police arrived, they tried to calm Karen down and reason with her, telling her that she was putting people's lives in danger with her violent behavior. But Karen was having none of it. She continued to yell and scream even as the police threatened that her actions would have some serious consequences. Police officer, ma'am, if you don't move out of the way, we will have to use force. Karen laughed manically at their words, and I genuinely thought in that moment that this Karen needed some serious therapy because her actions were not at all normal. Karen, I won't move. You cannot make me. Despite the police's attempts to persuade her, Karen continued to be uncooperative, and as a last resort, the police had to use force to move her out of the way so that the paramedics could continue with their work and load my mother into the ambulance to be taken to the hospital. The situation was very stressful, but thankfully the paramedics were able to quickly attend to the patient and she was transported to the hospital in time for treatment. After the emergency was taken care of, the police officer approached me and asked for my statement regarding Karen's behavior. Police officer, can you tell me what happened between you and your neighbor Karen? Me, yes officer. Karen has been a constant bully to everyone in the neighborhood, including my family. She has vandalized our property, harassed us with hate speech, and has even threatened us in the past. Police officer, I see. Can you tell me more about her hate crimes? Me, she's made racial slurs against my family which are completely unacceptable. She has also targeted other neighbors who are minorities and made them feel unsafe. The police officer listened carefully as I recounted the details of Karen's behavior towards me and others. Police officer, have you reported any of this to the authorities before? Me, yes I have, but nothing really has been done. It's like Karen has been given a free pass to terrorize the neighborhood. She either gets freed after going to jail for a few days or gets absolutely no consequences because the HOA of this neighborhood says that her hate comments are just her opinions and they could do nothing about it. Which I suppose ripe stars actually in some countries is true. But anyway, police officer, I understand. What happened today with the ambulance was unacceptable and we will take appropriate action to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. Me, thank you officer, I appreciate your help. As the police officer finished taking my statement, Karen could be seen in the distance, still protesting and yelling at the paramedics and the police. Karen, this is outrageous. You cannot do this to me. I have rights as a citizen to my property and my opinions, and you should not listen to this thief who is taking away our money and terrorizing our children. Police officer, ma'am, please calm down. We are just trying to ensure that everyone is safe and taken care of. Karen, don't you understand? It is us who are not safe from these people who are taking over our business and government. It was clear to all of us that there was no way to appease this Karen as she started struggling in her handcuffs and started throwing insults at the black people who were part of the police force. As the situation escalated, more police officers arrived on the scene to help manage the situation. Eventually, Karen was taken into custody and she faced legal consequences for her actions. And there were a lot of consequences that she faced. Vandalism of the ambulance, for which she was required to pay restitution for the damages caused, and hate crime towards me and my family. She was also interfering with medical treatment, which was Karen's refusal to allow the ambulance to park in front of her house. Karen's behavior towards the paramedics and the police officer was disruptive and proved to be disorderly conduct. At last, from all the evidence gathered via the CCTV footage, Karen was found guilty of harassment towards me and other minorities in the neighborhood. All this resulted in a significant amount of jail time and hefty fines that Karen was supposed to pay. Above all of this, the Homeowners Association were also charged with discriminatory behavior for not stopping Karen and letting her harass the neighborhood, which eventually led to the dissolution of the HOA. Good riddance. A new committee was formed later based on the votes of all the residents of the area, and while I was offered a position, I refused because becoming an HOA member is not really my thing. However, another Asian American woman did become a part of it, and that was enough for me. When Karen was released, the neighbors that were roaming outside booed, glared, and even laughed at her as she drove to her house. Karen did not come out for 3 days, and on the 4th day I saw a moving company's van parked in front of her house. It took her 2 more days to move away completely, and ever since that day, my life had been so much better. And by the way guys, I was a little bit confused at this part of the story because it sounded like Karen was in jail for 3 days and then came out or something, but obviously there was a jump in time because Karen did spend several years in jail. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.